Chair recognizes Representative Davis of Illinois for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question would be to Mr. Horowitz. First off, I want to say thank you for the work that you and your team have done on a wide variety of issues that you and your team in this country has faced over the last few years. I do want to raise an issue that falls outside the realm of transportation and infrastructure, though. But you raised it in your testimony, and that's because it affects many of my constituents, including me. And it's the issue of unemployment insurance fraud. Does your committee have data on how many individuals were victims of identity theft during the pandemic as it relates to attempts to defraud the unemployment insurance system? And how much money has the federal government been defrauded?
Congressman, we've worked at the PRAC closely with the IG at the Labor Department on these issues, and the Department of Labor OIG has done a lot of work in this space and has made some estimates that the amount of fraud could be upwards of 10% at this point, but it's still unknown. I should emphasize, as we're investigating and looking at these issues. But one of the significant issues, as I mentioned and as you referenced, is an identity theft, and the number of people that we've heard from who've expressed concerns about having their identity stolen. Of course, there's two very serious problems that arise from that. As you know, one is the program itself gets defrauded, but then separately you have the victim whose identity has been used, who has to deal with the fallout from their credit, other issues, security clearances, perhaps if you're a federal employee or play in a sensitive position, and a number of challenges that arise as a result of that. And that's why we set up the identity fraud working group that we did to try and tackle that problem.
Well, thank you, Mr. Horowitz. As I mentioned, I was a victim myself in my home state of Illinois. And after going through that ordeal, we tried to make sure that all of our constituents who were affected knew the right steps to take to protect themselves and protect their families and their own identity. But with that being said, sir, do you have any policy recommendations that you could lay out that might make it into any final report or recommendation?
We have, as a community, put out some. Actually, the Labor Department IG and the SBIG have public reports that they've recently issued on that, and certainly would be happy to send them to you. Much of it focused on what the agencies can do to both detect potential identity theft before it occurs, so stop it in its tracks, and then also, when it does occur, how to help victims of identity theft address those problems. So, for example, ensuring, and some of these are maybe obvious steps, but steps that SBAOIG, for example, has recommended with regard to the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, referred to as title. The importance, for example, of just maintaining and tracking identity theft complaints, processing information about identity theft, and helping to restore identity theft victims to their condition prior to the fraud, including stopping, loan billing statements, preventing delinquency collections, taking what may seem like common sense steps, but steps that aren't necessarily yet being done. And the IG there and the IG at the Labor Department has also made recommendations that they're following up on. I'm happy to talk with you further about that.
No, thank you with that. We tried to address the issue of unemployment in our initial funding given to states, like my home state of Illinois got $40 million over $40 million, I believe, to implement a pandemic unemployment insurance system to avoid some of these issues. Is there any work being done at the DOJ to investigate where those administrative fees might have gone and what states could have done better to actually address identity theft on the front end and unemployment fraud on the front end, since they got that administrative money before the pandemic unemployment insurance system was in place?
That's an excellent question, important question, Congressman. I'd have to follow up with the department on what they may be doing investigatively in that regard. But I do know from working with and speaking with the Labor Department IG and with our meetings that we've had ongoing with OMB leadership, that this is an important area that the Labor Department IG has been following up on and taking steps to look to address within the UI program, and that we've been raising consistently at the PRAC level and are going to continue to try and move forward on to get steps taken to try and address this very serious problem.
Representative, time's expired.